So we're going to go ahead and get started. I know people are still joining, and please continue to introduce yourself in the chat. But we have a lot of really fantastic information to cover tonight, so I want to make sure that we get started in a timely manner. So welcome. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you tonight for part 2 of our Protect Abortion training series. I know that I left the last call feeling so energized and grateful to just be in this fight with you all. And I hope that you who were able to join feel the same. If you weren't, I highly recommend that you watch the recording when you have time. We're super lucky to be joined tonight by representatives from 4 different DSA chapters doing incredible work across the country. They'll be participating in 4 different breakout rooms to help us learn more about their campaigns and build power maps for each. We'll review those a little later so you can decide which you're interested in joining. But for now, I do want to start by giving a quick shout out to Atlanta DSA, which along with a bunch of coalition partners won their campaign yesterday to have the Atlanta City Council donate $300,000 to the local abortion fund, which is really incredible. We also know that right now, as we speak, Kansans are voting on a ballot measure that would strip the right to an abortion from the state constitution. And DSA chapters there have done some really incredible organizing to turn out voters and defeat the ballot measure. We don't know the results there yet, but I say all of this to remind you just how essential this work is and the power that we really have to make an impact. And so what are we going to cover tonight? We have folks from all over the country on this call, and we know that some of you are already working on campaigns. Some of you may have an initial idea, and some of you are probably here because you have no idea where to start, and that's why you came to this call. So we're hoping that this will be useful to everyone, regardless of where you're at in the process. And to do that, we're going to start by taking a step back to remind us why we're here, what we're fighting for, and what DSA's role can be in this moment. We'll then overview some key considerations when identifying potential campaigns before moving into reviewing what it means to build strategic campaigns and how power maps play an essential role in that. And then we'll spend the last part of our time, broke it out into 4 different breakout rooms, each focus on a different campaign from a chapter that in DSA. And in those breakouts, we'll walk through a power map and start to build out a high-level campaign plan. Our hope is that this can provide tactical support for campaigns already underway, while also giving others a model and some key considerations to think about and build off of when launching your own campaign. A few hopefully obvious reminders. We're so happy to have so many of you on the call tonight, but we do ask your help in keeping the call focused on the topic at hand. So please make sure that if you're using the chat, you're staying on relevant topics. If not, it can be distracting. And like I said, we have a lot of really incredible and important information to cover tonight. And so now we're going to go ahead and learn a little more about who is on this call tonight. I'm going to launch the poll. So you should see a poll pop up on your screen. Let me know. Cool. So asking what role you play in DSA. We know that some of you, 16% right now, are not a DSA member yet. So we hope that you'll join us soon. It looks like about 50% of you all are chapter members. Around 20% are chapter chairs or elected executive committee members. Some local working group leaders. So a really wide range of people on this call tonight. And like I said, we want to make sure that this is helpful for people who have planned, 10 different campaigns with their DSA chapter and people who are not a DSA member yet. And so are maybe unfamiliar with what a strategic campaign might look like in this context. So super happy to have all of you here and really hope that being around such a diverse group of members is going to be really helpful and productive for this call. So I'm going to go ahead and end this poll and pass it over, share the results, pass it over to Renee, who's going to kick us off by talking about what this fight really means and what our role is in making sure that we win this fight.
Thank you, Suze. I think we should go to the next slide. So, and the one after that. So, this training is being put on by DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, as a national political organization that's both funded and run by its members. We seek to build a mass movement of the working class and transfer power from the ruling elite to that working class, and through doing that, gain freedom and democratic control over all aspects of our society. And so this fight over abortion is a fight not just for the right to have reproductive freedom for every American. It's also a fight over the very nature of our democracy. This is a moment when thousands, millions of people are seeing that the anti-democratic Supreme Court is prepared to immiserate all of us in service of their white Christian nationalist theocratic ideas, as well as doing the bidding of capital. We've lost Roe, but we're going to lose a lot of other things if we don't start fighting back. The only thing that can beat the money, the only thing that can beat the court is the people mobilized. So the fight for Roe is not just a fight around abortion access. It's not even just a fight around the full suite of reproductive justice and reproductive freedom fights. It's a fight around the very nature of democracy. And obviously, we don't currently have a democracy in the United States that we would recognize as fully democratic. But if we don't save what we do have and fight back, we're never going to be able to win the fight for full democratic control of all parts of our society. Next slide, please. So how do we organize ourselves to take action to protect abortion access now and to fight for the future? So when we are looking at the kinds of campaigns that we're doing, in the protect abortion, space, we are interested in choosing campaigns that make sense for where you are. So we are going to be giving a broad overview of a couple of different campaigns. Actions without analysis are much less likely to succeed. And, each chapter understands or hopefully through this process, we'll come to understand even better their local allies, opponents, and history. So we really want this session to help people figure out how to do work in the context of their own chapter. Whether you are new to organizing, this is the first time you've been on a training, or a chapter leader, we're hoping that these tools and techniques to research and develop campaigns will be useful. We want to win. We don't just want to make a statement. There are a lot of people out there whose response to Roe falling is to make a statement. We want to win, we want to fight back. And so we need to figure out how to effectively fight back. And so I'm going to throw it back to Suze, who's going to take us through some basics on choosing a campaign.
Awesome. Thank you, Renee. I am working between a few screens here, so I appreciate everyone's patience. So lots of things obviously are going to come into play when you're thinking about a campaign, and we don't have the time to cover them all tonight because it's going to vary, as the slide says, very significantly on your local context. But we're hoping that this is a good basis for you to start working off of and refer back to in the future. So we're not going to go through this list right now, but just remember that a campaign to protect abortion is going to look very different depending on where you are, because it comes with different political, legal, and social contexts. So we encourage you to refer to both this presentation and the worksheet that's been shared when you are thinking about or launching your campaign to ensure that it is rooted in your local context. Obviously, location is not the only thing you need to consider when choosing a campaign. This is just a brief, probably not exhaustive list of some other essential considerations to keep in mind. The first being the political and community landscape. Who else is doing this work? What are they working on? The resources that are available to your chapter. That could be the number of members you have, the number of hours that they have to dedicate each week. If you have money that you can allocate to a campaign, what do you have and what will you need to make the campaign a success? Expertise. So if you have a lot of really experienced electoral volunteers in your chapter, thinking about what do people know how to do in your chapter, and experience, this next point. If there are past campaigns, what successes or lessons learned can you draw on there? Very importantly, and we'll talk about this more in one sec, legal realities. And lastly, probably the most important thing here, chapter buy-in. So we know that people power is how we win. A chapter needs to decide democratically to do a campaign and commit to doing the work. It can't just be driven by one person. We know that that simply does not work, and that's not how we're going to win. So make sure that you are bringing others from your chapter along. So legal realities just can't be said enough. So we made its own slide. we cannot reiterate enough how treacherous and quickly changing the legal landscape is right now. So please, please, please talk to a lawyer and DSA headquarters before you launch any new campaign that involves assistance to people seeking abortion. You can reach out to the email listed here. Again, you'll have access to these slides, but please take this seriously and make sure that you're doing your due diligence before launching a campaign. Another thing to consider is that this work exists in the broader landscape. We are not alone in doing this work, obviously. And we know that successful organizing requires a mass movement in coordination with other groups involved in this work, as well as those who haven't been brought in yet. So there's a wide range of groups involved in the reproductive movement, and they all come with different approaches, values, priorities, strategies, and many of those will depend on where you are and can vary even within an individual organization. For a very brief overview, again, not exhaustive, the most visible types of organizations you may see are traditional reproductive rights groups, so large national nonprofits with local affiliates like Planned Parenthood or NARAL. They tend to be the best funded organizations in the space, but they might not always align with our values as socialists. Though again, there can be huge differences between organizations at the national and local level. There's also reproductive justice groups that approach this work using a social and political framework for understanding reproductive oppression and abortion access through a lens that includes racial justice. These groups are often led by women of color and often might be much more values aligned, but they're not as prominent, powerful, visible in terms of resources and presence across the country. Reproductive health organizations and clinics are the direct providers who are actually providing abortions and other reproductive health services. They can be affiliated with Planned Parenthood, but they're oftentimes independent. And it's really important to me personally, and I think for the movement, to lift up how important independent clinics are for providing abortion care in this country, especially for people later in their pregnancies. Lastly, abortion funds and practical support groups are groups that help meet the gap for patients trying to have an abortion. So that can be money, that can be travel, childcare, any other barrier that goes in between your rights and your actual access to an abortion. So again, it's really important to do your research into your local context, but one of the most important roles for DSA in this fight will be to bring other organizations into motion to defend abortion. And to that point, there are some best practices that are good to keep in mind for coalition work. As you begin to situate yourself within the landscape of organizations, there's some best practices that'll help make sure those coalitions are effective and meaningful. I think most importantly, we advise that you build relationships with care, but also don't compromise on your politics as socialists. So be clear on your values and what compromises you will or won't make. It can also be really useful to identify any existing relationships to other organizations, so like chapter members who are already volunteering with abortion funds, to start building those connections more organically. So I know that was a lot of information. We've only scratched the surface. The worksheet will help you walk through some of the considerations I mentioned, and we hope that you use these slides as a starting point for deeper conversations with your comrades. I'm now going to pass it over to Sophia, who's going to walk us through what a strategic campaign looks like and how we can build them.
Awesome. Thank you, Suze. So before we dive in on how to design and plan strategic campaigns to protect abortion, we first want to situate this work in the broader context of the DSA theory of power for how we can win, because ultimately these campaigns are part of a larger vision for change. So as you may already know, we identify the capitalist class as the problem. These are the people who own our workplaces, our politicians, our courts, our police, and maintain their power through an exploitative, undemocratic economic system, keeping us isolated, divided from each other, and approaching everything as lonely individuals. In the context of reproductive justice, we can understand that the ruling class wishes to force us to bear and to raise their future workers so they can continue to make profits off of our paid and unpaid labor. With this awareness, we, the working class, can identify ourselves as the agents of change because capitalism cannot function without us. However, widespread collective action is critical to win control of our labor, including our reproductive labor. Without building political power and power in our workplaces, we cannot make the change we need at the scale we need to ensure that we're not leaving anyone behind. And so it's with this understanding of power that we can approach this fight to expand abortion access and protect democracy more generally by building a movement of majority that makes winning and transformative demands. So when we say transformative demands, this is what we're talking about. Our transformative demands aim to win real material change for working class people, including free abortion, free childcare, good jobs, etc. It's important to remember that the right to abortion is part of a larger framework of reproductive justice that advocates for the right to have children, to not have children, and to parent your children in safe and healthy environments. As Renee mentioned earlier, DSA's overarching goal is to build a mass movement and transfer power from the ruling elite to the working class, and gain freedom and democratic control over all aspects of society. This means permanently changing how we make decisions in our society and massively broadening who is involved with those processes. We need to think intersectionally across justice-oriented movements that advocate for durable change to our political landscape. And lastly, our strategic campaigns are chances to confront the capitalist class and introduce socialism to everyone who doesn't make it to our reading groups. They are a mass political education that, when done right, make the class conflict clear and inspire more of the working class to join us in our fight. Okay, so how do we build a strategic campaign? You need 6 key elements for a successful campaign. They're on the slide here: demand, target, allies, opponents, strategy, and tactics. These should all be part of a campaign plan that your chapter puts together so everyone is on the same page on what you're doing and how you're doing it. It's not enough just to meet and discuss. Writing out a campaign plan of action will help guarantee your success. So diving into each of these, a demand is what you want to win. It's a clear goal for what you want to accomplish. And without a demand, your message is not clear and there's no way you're ever going to win. The more specific the demand is, the easier it will be to decide the appropriate strategy and target to win it. So your target is the person who has the power to grant the demand. You need to identify the person with the power to give you what you want. This is a human being who has decision-making power, and your job is to make it easier to give you what you want than to keep ignoring you or fighting you. Your target is not your base, and identifying your target, doing a campaign power map can be really helpful in identifying who this target is. Your allies are those who we can organize to have the power to influence. Allies are those who will actively help you or can be moved to actively help you. As Sue shared earlier, there's a whole landscape of reproductive justice actors working in your state and nationally. Talk to them, learn from them, organize with them, harness the power of collective action. And then it's also important to identify your opponents. Who do we need to be prepared to confront? Who else is trying to influence your target? These differ from a target because they don't have the power to give you what you want, and they can't be moved to do anything that you do. And then our strategy is our plan to win that integrates those previous 4 elements. You need to define and understand your demands, target allies and opponents before you can develop an effective strategy. And your strategy is composed of discrete tactics, which are things you do along the way to build pressure on your target. These tactics ideally will escalate over time and not start high. If you try something big before you have the power, you expose your weakness to your enemy. Tactics also need to apply pressure on the target, or else they're considered to be unstrategic. So I know this seems like a lot to keep track of, but don't worry, we'll practice going through each of these 6 elements in the breakout rooms in a little bit. So just some last key points around strategic campaigns. The demand should feel winnable, widely felt, deeply felt, and build leaders in your DSA chapter. If our goal is to grow as an organization, we need to choose a demand that draws others to support our cause. Again, remember that your target is a person. It's not just an organization or an amorphous entity. It's a person with the power to create the change that you ultimately want. So even if your general target is like the city council, that's made up of individual people, and you need to identify them and understand them. Your target is different from your opponent, as your target is somebody that you ultimately want to work with and not against. And your tactics should threaten the target's power. Power mapping is critical to understanding the formal and informal constraints on your target's power. How can you get them to do what you want them to do? And then lastly, as I mentioned, escalating tactics are an essential part of your general strategy. And ideally, you want to be breaking these down using project plans. Your tactics should fit into a broader strategy that builds momentum and pressure on your target over time. And your chapter should ideally develop discrete project plans that outline all 6 campaign elements, as well as other logistics such as roles, timelines, etc. Your project plans will likely get larger as the campaign grows with scope, and should have more people working on it as the number of folks taking on leadership roles grows. So now I'll be handing it off to Justin to talk through how to conduct a campaign power analysis.
Hey everybody, I'm Justin Charles. I use he, him pronouns. I'm in New York City DSA in Brooklyn, and I'm a member of the National Political Committee. So just give you a little bit of an overview of what we're about to be doing. I'm going to talk a bit about campaign power analysis, and then we'll go into a little bit of a demonstration about what power mapping is exactly. Then the specific chapters who are here to talk about the campaigns that they're trying to build. We're all going to go into breakout rooms to go through a power mapping exercise. And then we'll come back, we'll synthesize what we've learned in our breakouts, and then we'll close out. So next slide, please. So Sophia just talked about power a bit, but we want to kind of make clear what we mean by that. Power, like many words in English, is used different ways at different times. There's the power that we build together as members of DSA. There's power that we have in our unions, community organizations, etc. The individual power we develop to do the things we want to do, empowerment. Electrical power that makes our machines function. Another example. For our purpose today, and whenever we use a power map, we'll use this common definition of power, the ability to make one's vision a reality. So what are the forms of power? We've got political / legislative, the power at the ballot box, the power to make change through legislation. We have the power of laws and regulation and the enforcement thereof. We have consumer power, the power to buy a thing or not buy a thing. And then we have our labor power, our power as workers, the ability to stop production. How we make our vision a reality depends on where your target's power lies, and what forms of power your campaign can use to pressure that target. Targets respond based on where that comes from, where their power comes from. So you have to accurately identify your target source of power. That's key to planning an effective campaign, the strategies and tactics. So in the case of political legislative power, that's, votes, getting people to turn out and vote, or whether or not people can actually fund a campaign. Legal regulatory. I mean, one thing we're seeing is these ballot measures that are trying to put into law that abortion will or will not be a constitutional right in a given state. Consumer power, that's, we have the power to boycott, we have the power to not spend our money in certain places. And I think the most effective means that we have as workers, our labor power, the ability to stop production, to shut everything down. Move on to the next slide, please. So Sarah Nelson's quote here about the use of power, I think is good for us to think about here. If we've accurately assessed where our target's power comes from, and we have an honest assessment of this as well as our own power, when we use that power, and if we use it effectively, if we've done the prep work to understand the specific hinge point that will be most effective, using that power doesn't just deplete it. Using that power builds power. So what we want to try and do, and as we do these power maps, is really get clear on where our target's power lies, where ours comes from, and how we want to use it to win our demand, but also to continue to win more demands moving forward. Next slide, please. So in the case of this pressure campaign, what is power? That's the ability to force your target to agree to the campaign demand. That's a very specific example, but it's important to note that the target's personal feelings are only relevant to the extent that it determines how much pressure is required to get them to meet the demand. And now I'm going to hand it off to Eric to talk about power mapping.
All right, let's go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about power mapping. So what is a power map? Well, power map is a visual tool mapping allies, opponents, and relative influence over your target. You can use a power map to guide strategic and tactical decisions in a campaign. Creating a power map should be a collaborative process where it opens up opportunities for discussion. So first, it's good for us to define power, which is the ability to get a decision maker to say yes to us, even if they don't want to. And power in that way only reveals itself in action. Power isn't something that you can fully understand unless you see it used, unless you see your local city council member pressured to change their position, unless you see the way big business and AIPAC, for example, is intervening in our elections today. You can see the results, both failure to beat the left's power and success to beat the power of other progressives in just tonight's election alone. Understanding the way power is used with each and every campaign we take on will give us a better sense of how to predict it in the future. Power mapping requires research into the past, into the present of the current coalitions and what they've done, and relationships. It was originally developed by Anthony Thigpen. Let's go to the next slide. So first, determine who your target is. Power is only able to be truly measured in action, and for your campaign, it only matters for who your target is. Your target may be influenced a ton by labor unions. Maybe they take a ton of money for them and they rely on them for support, for example, for re-election. Or maybe they have never gotten support from labor unions. They hate labor unions and they've managed to find success otherwise. Understand who is going to influence your target, because that is all that matters. Focus your research around your target. Research your target's personal and professional connections. Again, maybe the union is important to them. Maybe they've got a particular donor. Maybe they have relationships with their colleagues on their appointed board or legislative body. Determine which individuals or groups in your community are affected by the issue and could be mobilized to influence your target. And start thinking about who those individuals or groups are connected to. It's through these webs of connections that communities organize themselves and exercise their own power over the decision makers in our community. Let's go to the next slide. So here is a power map. You notice it is actually a map. And what you do with this map is you have a discussion and you place different players on the map relative to each other. And so today we're going to be looking at an example power map on a pressure campaign targeting House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer in Maryland's 5th Congressional District. The demand is to co-sponsor the PRO Act. Note that passing the PRO Act is a top short-term demand of both DSA's National Green New Deal Campaign Committee and the DSLC, our Democratic Socialist Labor Council. The PRO Act is very much a transformative reform as it changes the balance of power between unions and bosses, increasing the ability of unions to organize and build power, especially in states that currently have right-to-work laws designed to keep unions weak. If we win the PRO Act, every labor campaign is easier to win from there on out. The balance of play is changed. So let's go to the next slide. Our blank power map with the target listed at the top, because remember, all the power is relative to how they can influence Steny Hoyer and get Steny Hoyer closer to a yes on the PROACT. So let's first look at the right side and think about opponents. Oh, all right. Or let's do them all at once. Let's put them all up there, because I do think power map becomes clear relative to all the different players involved. So it may be tough, for example, to place the Sunrise Movement. We know they are supporters of the PROACT. But what is their influence? Well, some people might feel they're very influential, some people not at all, but that's tough to get into an objective measure. It's a bit easier when you start adding multiple allies, opponents, potential players onto the board, because you can compare them to each other. Okay, Sunrise Movement, they're less influential than Labor. You see, Labor is above them on the influence part of this graph. But probably more influential than Michaela Wilkes. Who is more influential than non-unionized workers, who is more influential than the IWW. Now, all of a sudden, you can fill out this board in a way that makes much more sense and is much more easy to organize around, to determine who to focus on. Let's also look at some of the opponents in red. The Maryland Chamber of Commerce, which is slightly more influential than big tech, Facebook, for example, but they are probably more actively opposed to the PROACT. And so we can expect them to work harder to use their influence than big tech. Putting all of these players, all of these potential allies, maybe neutral bodies that could be moved one way or the other, all these potential opponents onto a map, and figuring out, okay, who are the most influential folks and who are the folks who are most actively for or against the PROACT, can give you a rough sense of where the gravity lies. You can see a bit of momentum around that cluster of green pulling things to the right, but also a few less but more influential individuals and groups pulling it to the left towards that opposed side. And you get a rough sense of the balance of power. Maybe the DNC or Democratic Party members, if you have good relationships with either group. I'm not sure if we have a good relationship with the DNC, but for the sake of this power map, just think of who the neutral bodies that could be moved one way or the other are. And if you or your opponent's moving can change the balance of power in such a way that the weight feels decisive. You're not going to get a perfect calculation, but it opens up discussions. Okay, who's actually influential? Who should we focus on? Who's going to move the issue one way or the other? How do we spend our limited time and focus our limited energy on specific coalition partners and opponents that will matter the most to fight with and fight against? And so let me go through some examples. Yeah, as you move forward in the campaign, things may shift as more research is done. Another important thing to remember, this is not a static map. This is something that will constantly move as you better understand the dynamics of power. And as, of course, the campaign changes. Maybe all of a sudden, a big donor jumps in that really wants to influence things the other way. Maybe all of a sudden, the Sunrise Movement decides to make the PROACT their top priority, and they move further to the right on support. Understand who you want to move on this graph to then build your campaign tactics out of those broad directions. The closer to the top, remember, is the more influence. With limited resources for the campaign, this can help you prioritize different tactics and different forces at different times. Note that Hoyer did sponsor the PROACT in the last Congress, so there's a reasonable assumption he would do it when it is reintroduced, but this doesn't necessarily mean we don't run a pressure campaign to make sure and to build power through the campaign itself. All right, let's go to the next slide, because y'all are going to do this yourself. It may be a bit confusing now, but taking the time to actually work through power maps is the best way to learn it. So a few resources to help you craft more accurate power maps to help you have more informed discussions. Guttmacher is a great hub for research on a wide range of reproductive topics. Also tell them to stop busting their union. Indiana is a comprehensive, up-to-date website with providers and support services across the US. It's good for understanding the landscape of what services are available where you are. Ballotpedia, Open Secrets, Little Sis. Take some time, do some research to set up your initial power map, and then use that as fodder for a discussion, and use that discussion to determine where to spend your limited time in the most effective way. All right, next slide, please. Remember, different targets respond to different forms of power. Maybe it's organized money that they respond to the most. Maybe it's media attention. Maybe it's people pressure. Maybe it's very specific types of groups or people. Pay attention to your target's behavior. Try to learn what they are interested in and afraid of the most. Power Map is a visual tool for mapping allies, opponents, and relative influence over your target to guide strategic and tactical decisions in a campaign. It's not static. Power mapping allows you to shift allies, opponents as levels of support or influence over the target change. And remember, power mapping requires research and relationships. These are the two ways that you will best understand the dynamics of power over your target and be able to create the most accurate power map and the most effective campaign plan. Now, let's move on to our breakout options. And Renee, you're up.
Hi, all. So I'm going to take us through the 4 chapter campaigns that chapters have really generously agreed to let us use as our workshops. And I just want to thank everybody who did the research to be ready for this. So we wanted to present a variety of different kinds of campaigns and different kinds of political contexts. While we all know our ultimate goal is to restore abortion rights nationwide and to delegitimize the Supreme Court, we don't have the organization that we would need to take on that fight yet. And so what we want to do is build power through campaigns that both expand access, defend against attempts to limit access, and really create tensions for contradictions in the system that can precipitate some of these constitutional showdowns. And so the 4 campaigns that we're going to feature, first, in the state of Kentucky, which has a historically conservative legislature, but a current Democratic governor, the legal status of abortion in Kentucky is that there is a trigger law that was struck down by a court judge by the under the state constitution. And an appellate court recently reversed that, but it's going to go to the Kentucky Supreme Court. And so the status of that law is a little bit up in the air. In the meantime, the anti-abortion forces have basically put together this ballot measure to it was struck down again in Kentucky. Okay, so late breaking news. But the antis are trying to put a provision in the state constitution that would make clear that the state constitution does not protect abortion. So it would take the state court out of the equation. So both DSA Metro Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky and Louisville DSA and potentially other chapters in Kentucky are putting together a campaign against that ballot measure, and that's up in November. And Kentucky is both of the chapters are sort of mid-size, anchored in a larger metropolitan area. And obviously it's not the deepest red state, but it's a red state and medium-sized chapters. So that's that one. So if you are in a state where ballot measures are at issue, or if you're in that kind of political context, if you're in a place that's similar to Kentucky, consider joining that breakout group. Next slide. Central Vermont DSA. So Vermont is a bluish state, very blue state, a blue enough state that there's not really a question of the real threats to abortion access itself. However, as we talked about in the first training, there are a lot of really shitty things that go on in this context, even in blue states, one of which is crisis pregnancy centers. So crisis pregnancy centers are basically organizations that sort of masquerade as abortion clinics. They try to sort of trick people who are seeking abortions into coming into their facilities, and instead of getting, healthcare, they get told falsehoods about abortion. They get pressured into not having an abortion, and these groups often, they end up delaying people who are seeking abortion by taking them through this sort of false nonsense. And so there is a fairly big CPC in, I believe, right in Montpelier, the state capital, which is the sort of central Vermont DSA's city that they're around, and they are exploring legislative campaigns, both at the state level and the municipal level, and exploring potential kinds of pressure campaigns. The anti-choice movement spent the last few decades making it impossible for people to get, contractors in to build clinics, right? So sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, who is the CPC's landlord, who gives them, their stuff. So if you are in a blue state, a smaller blue state, or if you're particularly interested in crisis pregnancy centers, or that might be a good breakout room to join. And yes, and they also get funding from the federal government often, and often state government as well. Then we have East Bay DSA. Spoiler alert, I am in East Bay DSA, so this is one that I have been working on and will be the chapter rep for. But California, obviously a huge state and a very blue state. And so what we're looking into, among other things, is passing legislation to bar California state employees and local employees from aiding any kind of out-of-state prosecutions through complying with things like document requests, subpoenas, and extradition requests. East Bay DSA is basically Oakland, Berkeley, and then a bunch of other smaller nodes of chapter memberships. We're the 6th largest chapter in the country, and the 2nd largest in the state. So that if you're interested in ways that blue states can sort of make trouble for red states, if you're interested in a state legislative campaign, if you're in California, this might be the breakout room for you. And the next slide, please. And finally, a campaign so good it's already won. Atlanta DSA got behind a city council resolution to donate $300,000 from Atlanta city funds to the local abortion fund in Atlanta, and it passed. Atlanta, obviously, huge city, the huge blue city in the deep red state. Georgia still has unified Republican control of its state government, and there's a 6-week ban that just went into effect there. So again, what kinds of things can you do if you have a big blue city in a big red state? So next slide, please. So here we've got the overview. So what's going to happen now is Suze is going to launch the breakout rooms, and you're going to choose which one you want to go to. So again, hopefully this overview sort of helped you decide. Obviously, it might be hard to choose if you're excited about all of these, but we're going to go ahead and open those breakout groups and go ahead and choose the one that you're most interested in.
Welcome back, everyone. I am sure if you were like our group, your breakout session was way too short. But the good news is this is the beginning of your campaign journey, not the end. And so that's why we want to hear a little bit about what is your next step after this meeting. And so I'm going to launch it. You should see options. Are you going to work on developing a campaign locally within your chapter? Are you going to volunteer nationally to support another chapter's campaign? Are you going to join DSA because you're not a member yet and we would love to have you? Or maybe you're still not sure, and that's okay too. so far we have one new DSA member, so I would like to be the first to cordially welcome you to DSA. 78% of people are saying they're going to work on developing a campaign in their local chapter. Some people are still not sure, and again, that's totally fine. But the good news is you have support to help you. You are not alone in this fight. And that is one of the wonderful things about being part of a mass organization like DSA, that you can learn from your comrades and build these campaigns together. You can your chapter at, sorry, let me move my Zoom thing out of the way and end the poll, share results, and get to my notes. Okay, so you can look up your chapter at dsausa.org/chapters. You can also reach out to us, the Protect Abortion Committee, for help organizing at protectabortion@dsacommittees.org. Or you can sign up to support other chapters at dsausa.us/volunteer. And again, if you're not yet a DSA member, I really do encourage you to join us today at dsausa.org/join. We would love to have you in this fight with us as a member of DSA. I do want to note, I don't think it's official yet, but we're hearing some really positive reports from our comrades in Kansas who have been organizing against the ballot measure there, that it looks like that ballot measure to remove the protection of abortion in the state constitution is going to fail, which just shows again how powerful this work really is. We do have the capacity to fight back against these laws. We know that abortion is popular and that people want abortion to remain legal and accessible. We just have to give them the opportunities to get involved and to make that a reality. So I'm really excited to see where this work goes and to continue working on it with all of you, and go forth and organize. Thanks so much. And we're really happy that you were with us tonight.